there is this absolute unbelievable demand for AI is going to crash hard into the supply constraint. Now, I estimate that 90% or greater of all inference will basically be delivered to Earth via space.
If Tesla doubles and SpaceX triples, then Tesla shareholders haven't gained anything vis-a-vis their share in a combined company.
The moon is going to be pretty much a robotic industrialization place.
AI and automation and robotics are going to drive down the cost of things. We need to show that.
We get ourselves to 1 terawatt in only 3 years and 100 terawatts in 7. 1 terafab is not good enough. Leadership lacks imagination. They don't know how to grow their businesses with this beautiful productivity tool.
I'm afraid that is coming if we're not here. We're playing with fire there. Starlink will be expanded into multiple other markets.
Both chips and power, both of them are the enemy of this.
Hey, Phil, welcome back.
Hello, Cern. Little less than 2 weeks this time, right?
A little bit less than 2 weeks. We delayed our last show after the Tesla earnings call, so we were a little less than 2 weeks.
Yeah, I'm glad nothing's happened once again.
Nothing's happened, but you know what? You know what we're going to do today? We're going to fight.
I'm going to fight, okay.
You and I are going to fight.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah. The topic today is Tesla versus SpaceX.
I bought my SpaceX shirt.
Yeah, and I've got, well, I don't have my Tesla shirt on. This is an XAI shirt.
Oh, you're losing the fight already?
I guess so. I guess I'm already showing I've changed sides, huh?
I think so. I do
like your jacket here. This is pretty cool SpaceX jacket you got going on there.
If you saw the number of Vans I have in the closet, you'd see that I match all that.
Nice.
Yeah. That's awesome. Let's do it.
Let's do it. Yeah. So we have some breaking news, I guess, today, right? We've got this deal with SpaceX and Anthropic. Yeah. And I'm curious about what you think about this.
I predicted it. Yeah, I mean, I predicted in the following way. I realized that Anthropic was running into a supply wall. It's been a theme of mine for the last 2 weeks anyway, independent of this, talking about supply and compute. And Anthropic made some noise about, I think, raising prices somewhere and some issues. And I was like, wow, you know what? I think these guys are in trouble. I mean, they not in trouble, but it's like you can only get so much. I think their chief hosting partner is Amazon AWS. They're on Azure, and I think they're on Google Cloud as well. But this is an interesting development for sure.
It's one of those things where even though Elon and Dario may not have been best of friends, they have a common enemy in Sam Altman.
They sure do. He might be a deserving enemy as well.
Yeah, I think so too.
I don't know. I think if you there's that part of it, and I think that's a strong part of it, honestly. But I think it makes a lot of sense. I mean, what we saw Elon do here is build. Like in other words, he's going to go do this, coming off of the mess that OpenAI was from his perspective about being open, being a nonprofit, being a steward of good AI, all the things that he was concerned about or wanted. And then he goes off and he says, well, I'm going to go do this XAI thing. And what is the first move he did? I mean, you could say he started to build a software team. That's fine. But he started to scale the compute side. And he picked that site in Memphis, and I think most of us thought, what the heck is he doing out in Memphis? Mm-hmm. Maybe power is plentiful, and the local governments there are aggressively looking for, tech in their neighborhood before. Yeah. I mean, and so he built ahead of that curve. He knows the scaling laws better than anybody, and got ahead of that.
Plenty of power, plenty of water, and also right on the state line, so that if there's any trouble in one state, you can just do it in the other.
Yeah, it's a piece of perfection, right? Because he's dragging power from Mississippi across the state line because he can't get the power directly. I mean, obviously he's got behind the meter power in a pretty hard way there, but it's all the right move for him to do that and to build something massive there way ahead of the demand side. And I think he's built out Colossus 1 and 2, and I think the way this is structured is that Colossus 2 remains or will be the site for xAI's work, and Colossus 1 will essentially be dedicated to Anthropic's use cases.
And that has 220,000 NVIDIA GPUs, H100s, H200s, GB200s.
Yeah. And, there's, you can look at the one side of the coin is that there's been some reports of underutilization of the resources.
Yeah.
This is, a massive investment. So I think that it makes sense. But look, Elon doesn't need to keep Anthropic there. I don't know how the structure, I don't know how the deal's structured, but ultimately it's probably got, a lot of flexibility on his side to move back in. But, I think the big signal here is something completely different. I think the real reality is, this is what I spent literally last week thinking about and writing about, is that there is this absolute unbelievable demand for AI, and it is crashing, is going to crash hard into the supply constraint.
Yeah.
And that is both chips and power. Both of them are the enemy of this, of this. And ultimately, all of a sudden, 2 months ago, we probably wouldn't even said this, but Orbital data center is making more and more sense. And, I estimate that 90% or greater of all inference in, I don't care whether you want to call it 5 or 10 years, it doesn't really matter, will basically be delivered to Earth via space, period. End of story. Yeah. Like data centers, I think, terrestrial data centers, I think, will be mostly dedicated to training AIs because of, basic coherence, trying to build a coherent computing cluster, basically trying to build a supercomputer that operates as a single unit. The beauty of inference is that it's really a user's request. So by doing it in space on distributed across millions of satellites, all of a sudden, that becomes an amazing inference center, right?
And that's the case where maybe the smaller is better, right? You don't need such a large facility. And it's smaller in terms of each individual unit, but larger in terms of scale.
Elon started with this idea that I say we because I feel like I feel very much part of this whole thing, like the story, but that they would start with 100 kilowatt 100 kilowatt satellites, and that would serve, I don't know, let's call it 250 GPUs a piece. Whether you call them GPUs or not, but basically Tesla D3 style chips.
Yeah.
Roughly guessing that they're about 400 watts of draw per chip, and you can scale, and then you can scale that out to, 1 million, and that's not even a big number, which is, the other part of the reality of the thoughts I were thinking this week is, do you have that post? Could you jump to that post with the little graph that I have?
Yeah, actually, we'll just get there in a second.
Yeah,
so
okay.
Hold your thought.
Yeah, that's fine.
And I'm sorry, I'm not sure if I've got the charts here in the right order, but we'll get there. But just on the Anthropic thing, just to close on that, the one thing that was interesting is they expressed an interest in partnering with SpaceX to develop orbital compute capacity. So that's interesting as well. Another partner at the table to bring some capital. Anthropic, I guess, is going to have their own IPO splash here at some point.
They will.
Raising a bunch of money. So we've got two powerhouses now joining forces on that front.
I don't really know if they have a choice other than to go through SpaceX, but it's good to see. This is a really...
Yeah.
SpaceX is going to be such a powerhouse. Oh my God, right?
Yeah. By the way, do you see something in this post that catches your attention besides the image?
Besides the image?
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, no.
A new name for SpaceX. SpaceX AI.
Yeah, little interesting. Doesn't roll off the tongue.
Well, I'm wanting to put an extra X in there. I wanted to say SpaceX XAI, but
Yeah.
it's XAI.
Yeah, I guess basically what's happening here is X AI is being dissolved, and it is SpaceX AI. I would prefer it be SpaceX Space AI as opposed to
One word.
Yeah, one word, but that's okay. But you know what's really funny about this? I keep thinking to myself, all things lead back to X, because should SpaceX and Tesla combine? Somebody asked, what do you think that'll be called? And I said, X Corp, of course.
Yeah.
so
You can't keep adding more words onto this name. I wonder if this is a possible ticker symbol. Either X, of course, is the leading candidate, but it could be SXAI. Could be the ticker.
Yeah. I don't
know if that's spoken for or not.
I think it'll just be X, right?
Probably.
Yeah.
It would definitely make sense to get a single letter ticker. That's a coveted symbol.
Just like X.com, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of fitting too that the old U.S. Steel X symbol gets transferred to the new, the new industrial Colossus.
Yeah, it's very fitting. It's very fitting because it's actually, direct analogy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's cool.
So let me see if I can find your slide here. I think you are referring to this one.
Yes, I am. Yeah. So this links to a few different posts, and I kind of wanted to just bring everybody quickly through the math here. Now I know I'm going to sound, for some people, I know I'm going to sound like Captain Obvious. In other words, duh, we knew we were going here. Yeah. Other people, I think it'll be an eye opener, and in a weird way, sometimes things that I already know when I build a graph like this become an eye opener as well. In other words, I can start to see what's happening here. So the way I looked at this problem is I said, okay, when we started, we were in the CPU generation, the 1980s through 2000s. We were growing compute by 58% a year. It's 1.5x per year. And, you can call that big, you can call it small, you can call it whatever you want. Now, the growth was basically two things were happening. The first thing, and by the way, it's funny, we measured everything in MIPS, millions of instructions per second, like as if that was a big number. Two things are happening. Processors were processing more, and there were more processors consumed, right? Yep. The personal computer revolution happened, and everybody had a personal computer on their desktop or ultimately a laptop. And, this was the growth of that industry. And so I said, what if you took AI capacity today, which is planet-wide about 30 gigawatts? Elon has that in his chart, the terafab chart. I think he's got 20, but my measure was 30. Who cares? It's going to look like a small number. And I said, okay, so imagine that you grew that to 1 terawatt. Now, why 1 terawatt? Because Elon basically told us that Terafab is going to build 1 terawatt of compute capacity annually, right? So consider it the target. So if you were growing at 1.58x per year, you'd go from 30 gigawatts to 1 terawatt in 7.7 years. Mm-hmm. And then let's look at the next milestone, the 100 terawatts, go up 2 orders of magnitude. Why? Well, because it's kind of found buried in Elon's comp plan at SpaceX that he would ultimately deliver 100 terawatts. And that number seems astronomical and crazy. And that would be on the basis of growing at 1.58x per year. That would take 17 years to get there. So 2043. But here's the thing. AI is growing much, much faster, more than twice the rate. It's growing at about 3.4x per year. And so now let's do the math with 3.4x. We get ourselves to 1 terawatt in only 3 years. And 100 terawatts in 7. Now, the caveat is that we have to kind of add some efficiency gains back into the equation. We can't assume that there's no efficiency happening. And I'm not talking about software efficiency. I'm talking about hardware efficiency. So if we add what I'm estimating as reasonable efficiency, In other words, how the industry's been operating. All this stuff is basically how it's been operating. And that brings us up to a terawatt in 4.3 years. In other words, we get a little bit more time. And 100 terawatts in 10 years. So
on the chart, it's taking this blue line and it's knocking it down to this orange.
Exactly. That's exactly what's happening. So the blue line is, raw demand as we're seeing it growing at this 3.4x, which is exactly where it's growing the last couple of years. And this is by the way, it's a logarithmic scale on the, so it makes it look a little flatter than it really is. But then you can't represent very much in the small portion of that chart if you don't do it this way.
Yep.
And then so I added efficiency in, and so I knocked that down. And if we look at the line, sort of pretend that there's a full green line where the dots are, that's essentially what's available in supply. And so we look at it and we see that, and when I'm talking about supply is what I did was I looked at where Taiwan Semi is, considering them the principal fab for complex chips. And I look completely at the complex chip market.
Yep.
And when I say that, it needs to be said that it also includes chips that aren't directly AI chips, because that is part of what they're building. Like, you can't take that away because it's taking up floor space. So if you said, well, okay, what is that, Phil? Well, it's practically all of Apple's business, right? The A chips and the M chips for the laptops, the A chips for the iPhones. That consumes a lot of the complex chip business for Taiwan Semi. Now, they're growing like crazy. They're growing as fast as they think they should. I think that their growth is always measured by the fact that there's always a boom bust cycle in semiconductors. And so I think they're not as being as aggressive as Elon. But that's the bottom line. That's like where the dotted line is. So in other words, there's a huge gap between what we need and what we're producing. And that is why Elon has been talking about terafab. And I think we get it in our brain. It's like he's talking about terafab because it's some insular Tesla thing. It relates to building Tesla products and services. Okay, sure, it does. But in a way, it's filling the larger demand gap. And so what I did here was I layered terafab, 1 terafab. This is the key point here, that production at exactly 1 terawatt per year the annualized basis. And that's kind of how it works. You can see there's some ramp. Now you can shift that right if you want. You can shift, you can say, Phil, you're crazy. Terafab's not coming online. Then fine. Move it out a year or two. And so you can see it's like, oh, wow, I can see it's going to catch the orange line. Great. But then, of course, that's 1 terafab. Yep. And all of a sudden it starts to teeter off again. And why do we care? Because we're trying to get to ultimately 100 terawatts of compute, right?
Yeah. Why is this green space here not constant across this chart? Why does it seem to narrow?
Sorry. Show me what you're pointing at.
The terafab ramps, and you've got this difference between the dotted green line and the solid green line.
And why does it?
And it seems to narrow as we go out here. What's happening there?
Yeah, because what's happening is it's only 1 terafab. It's not 10 of them, and we need more. 1 terafab is not good enough. So what happens is we start to catch it, and then we start to teeter off, because all we're producing at the terminus of this chart is 1 terawatt of compute per year, and demand is growing like this, and we're not going to catch it. So
I guess it's the nature of this log chart, though. I guess this difference here is constant across this chart. It says that the log scale is shortening this over as you move up here, I guess, right?
Yeah, I think it's just artifact of using a logarithmic scale, which is sort of necessary, because I don't know how else if you just do this linearly, it looks weird. It just sharply goes straight up stairs.
So it looks like then you need to add a terafab, every other year or something.
Yeah, exactly. And guess what? That ain't happening on planet Earth. So guess where it's going?
Yeah.
In other words, what I think is for the next 5 to 10 years, it's terrestrial chip production. Past 10 years, it's probably the industrialization of fabrication on the moon. And I know that sounds like, wow, that's a fantasy. You're out of your mind. No, that's what's going to happen. That is actually what is going to happen.
It has to happen.
We can't build this type of, look, a terafab is at a minimum a 100 million square foot facility.
Mm-hmm.
It is 5 pentagons or 2 central parks. And now try to imagine building 2 of them or 3 of them or 4 of them. And what did Elon just say? It's going to cost, I don't know, there was an initial SpaceX investment at, I think it was like
58 billion.
Yeah. I mean, the cost is still going to be up there, but you got to go somewhere to produce these chips over the long haul. And what's really crazy about all this is I don't even think this is even close to the further acceleration on demand.
Right.
So I actually don't even know what is going to happen. I mean, obviously the things come into line based on, you can't demand something that you can't supply. So things have to even out. Now you can do your own math on what that makes in the world valuable, but I'm just talking about consumer demand for inference compute. And I'm really talking about inference compute. You can basically take training and put it, in the small ball area here.
Yep.
Because inference is just us using it. And so the question is, as we start to see, today we have use cases that like we kind of, in some narrow sense, we're generating some image, we're generating some video, we're doing a lot of LLM queries, and that's AI to the universe, right? We haven't thought a lot about agentic, meaning non-humans using AI, AIs using AI. Or processes using AI to ultimately human might be the recipient of the output, but it may not be invoking all the processes. And we're not necessarily computing, real generative stuff like the changeover to where we throw out our iPhones and start having generative devices, or we don't think of movies as things that we produce for mass audience. We produce them for ourselves on demand, or video games, or maybe video games and movies become sort of one thing at some point.
It's like bringing dreams to life.
What's that?
It's like bringing dreams to life.
Yeah, it's quite crazy where I think it's headed, and it's only in a way it's. And people would say, okay, wait a minute, Phil, the reason you're completely wrong is there's going to be these vast software efficiencies. And that's true. But guess what? During the growth phase, from the 80s into the 2000s of what we'll call the CPU era, all those things happened. We got efficiencies back.
Yep.
And whether they were software or hardware, and we still started to grow. We still grew. And this one just seems much more exponential. You know what I mean? It just feels so much bigger. And so, when I think Elon doesn't even, like, he broadcasts these numbers, and some people, I think, go, oh, that's just him talking big shop. That's what Elon does. He talks a big game, like as if, only he understands. Well, in a weird way, I think this graph is in his brain. And it's not in a lot of other people's brains. It's somewhere on the, periphery. And yet, what does that mean? Like companies like Taiwan Semi are growing at a rate that isn't going to catch the curve. So, of course, we're going to do a terafab. Of course, he sees the need for a terafab. And maybe when he started thinking about it, he was just thinking about the gapping on, oh shit, I'm going to have a chip supply gap for Optimus and for Robotaxi or FSD, for autonomous vehicles. And just there alone, he has that gap. But then, of course, he widened that story to the idea that SpaceX would go off and build this orbital data center. And what has he said? He said about 80% of these chips will go into space. The truth is actually more will go into space than 80% by far, eventually, as this thing goes. And by the way, the interesting thing about it is, can Elon build 2 terafabs? Maybe he could build 2 on Earth, 3 on Earth. I don't know. I'm not here to, but what I'd say is once he figures out how to do it, and once he gets it going, and I think it's going to be hard, but once that happens, then all of a sudden the answer is, of course he can, because
copy and paste at that point.
Yeah, he's not being held back by some fundamental kind of barriers, outside of things we don't know about.
Although I suppose the first terafab on Earth is a challenge, and then subsequent ones are easier. But then ultimately, as you said, on the moon is where it needs to be.
It seems like that's the place. I mean, there's going to be a point where that just opens up and it's obvious. I mean, it's not going to, it's the moon is a robotic world for the most part. I mean, it's not, we keep thinking in our brains, oh my God, what was the moon? Well, we're Artemis program. We're bringing men back to the moon with all of the problems, which are all the life support systems for humans. And yeah, we want humans there, but the reality is the moon is going to be pretty much a robotic industrialization place. And I mean, Elon is best positioned. Well, he's best positioned to get us there because of this funny little company called SpaceX. But the other reality is he's best positioned to get us there from a manufacturing and that industrialization, because my God, if you think about it, what has he spent the last N years at Tesla doing, and we're at this point with, say, a product like Cybercab, where essentially there's no human in the loop. And he gets that. And then he's got this other beautiful little object coming online called Optimus, which fills that gap completely. So now you can have generalized labor. I mean, as we said, I think it was the last podcast, it's pretty clear that Optimus will outnumber humans on Mars or the moon by more orders of magnitude, for sure. Right. Yeah. So that's cool.
So let's get back to the fight, Phil.
Yeah.
Because you and I really need to duke this out.
Okay.
Although I think we're probably on the same side, but we'll pretend.
We'll pretend. Okay.
So tell us about your SpaceX versus Tesla post here. You really tried to be provocative with this one.
Yeah, well, it's just pissing at people. Because
you're feeling feisty. You were ready for the attack.
Yeah, I mean, people that know me know that that's kind of the real personality. It's not just this engineering personality serene engineering personality, but yeah, I mean, it's like, I find it's really interesting because you have a group of people out there that say, I don't know. It's just this whole thing about people projecting their own ways of doing things onto this magician known as Elon. And then, it's like, oh my God, he's a magician. He does things that none of us can do. And then all of a sudden, it's almost like the same group of people saying, yeah, but he can't do these things because I can't see how it's possible.
Right.
And so I just saw that as this weird thing. It's like, look, he's not built the way you are. He doesn't think the way you think. He doesn't operate the way you operate. And by the way, when he finally puts out his thoughts, then everybody says, what do they say? They say, oh, that's obvious. Well, they didn't say it a month before he said it.
That's right.
And they're like, I had someone complaining this week. It's like, oh, you Tesla fanboys or, whatever, Elon fanboys, you're always giving him credit for this, that, or the other thing. And I'm thinking, well, yeah, because he usually does actually say it first. And when he does say it first, it either becomes this magician aura or it becomes this thing where people are like, oh, come on, he's crazy. Why is he talking about, orbital data centers? He's just kicking the can and blah, blah, blah. So I felt like, if you look at combining these two companies, SpaceX and Tesla, and there's great arguments for, and I guess some arguments against, I'm kind of more in the for camp. I have a reason why I think that, but there's this whole economic dilution thing that Tesla investors are worried about. And that's fair. Let's put that in a box and say completely fair. Yep. And they're shareholders. So let them duke it out. Let them duke it out. Let them be loud shareholders if they want and say, hey, we're not getting enough. They don't know what the offer would be, but they're assuming that somehow Elon is getting rid of one of his children he no longer likes one of his children or something. And by the way, they think it's all in his hands. Like there isn't a board of directors sitting there too that has, a duty to its shareholders. So let those shareholders be loud, but
and let's just touch on that before you move on to the Elon dilution part, which is the topic of your post, which I think is really interesting. On the economic dilution, just to correct a couple things out there, I think a lot of Tesla shareholders are saying, well, we're on the cusp of Robotaxi taking off. We've been waiting all these years.
Yeah.
And that's true. We expect a big value ramp because of that. And a lot of people are fixated on what the price of Tesla might be before they would merge with SpaceX. The important thing to remember, though, is it's a relative price situation. So if Tesla doubles and SpaceX triples, then Tesla shareholders haven't gained anything vis-a-vis their share in a combined company.
Yeah.
So that's an important thing to think about. It's not just what's the price of Tesla. We're now going to have SpaceX AI in the market doing its thing. Of course, both of them can go up, both of them can go down, both of them can go up at different rates. So anyway, that's enough said on that. And of course, we don't know anything yet about potential merger terms.
Right.
So the economic part's kind of a moot point at this point.
Yeah, I think it's completely natural that people would have this concern because that's what shareholders always do in any merger, right? They worry about, that's why they're here. They want to get paid for the value. But, I was just commenting really on, look, I'll stay out of the weeds on that one. I'm not going to pretend that I have your brain on this I have a dog in the fight, but I just look at what's going on with Elon and I'm thinking it's dilutive to his energies.
Yes.
To sit between the fences to argue between two children when he could combine them. To have, which child both children come to him and, he's supposed to deal with that. And we know how that goes if you have more than one child and nobody really wins and everybody thinks they lost. And sometimes, so I just feel like it's like, I want his mind focused on the hard problems, the engineering problems, the work ahead, not making this child happy when this child's, it just seems that's very dilutive in ways that are, by the way, those ways are so taxing too. That's the other thing about it. It's like, it's one thing for Elon to walk into an AI5 chip meeting on a Saturday, spend 5 hours and have it be hard stuff, but to sit there and adjudicate this whole issue, like, okay, I saw people today said SpaceX is going to be the primary capital investor for build Terafab, and people are like, well, what about us? What happened to the and I was like, wow, that's not, I don't even think that we're even there yet. And then I'm sure that Elon's read 52 of those posts and he's having some back conversations we don't even know about. And I'm thinking, God, wouldn't it be cool if none of those things had to happen and it was just one big company? I think the other issue, of course, for people that are into the whole, the value of the thing, which of course is if you're invested, that's really maybe your prime objective, I would think, is, what's the value unlock when you have these large companies? And I think one of the things I'd say is a lot of people compare it to like General Electric. And I'm thinking, well, yeah, but General Electric was a conglomerate of rather unrelated businesses. You had CAT scans over here and big turbines over here, and the two didn't meet. And there's a lot of different pieces within these two companies that meet and collide and work off of each other on a daily basis, especially since Elon is so into the vertical integration of things. Where are we now? We have Tesla's AI chip design team, chip team building the chips that SpaceX and Tesla are going to produce in Terafab. So the intellectual property is part of Tesla. What value do you pay for the intellectual property component of that? To shift it is if it's all SpaceX. What if it's not all? Oh my gosh,
Oh, it's never ending complexity. Everything that SpaceX is going to do off planet, particularly building infrastructure on the moon and eventually Mars, it needs everything that Tesla's done for that. And then, of course, Starlink Tesla can only benefit from this global communication system, and then of course AI, orbital data centers and inference compute. Tesla only benefits from that here on Earth. So they're so joined at the hip now in terms of what they're doing and where they're going.
Exactly. I think they're very joined at the hip. I mean, I think there is some rational thought to people worrying about the value unlock of businesses. If you just spun out energy from Tesla, or you just spun out semi, or, but those things are already part of this thing, and so, I mean, Google isn't one business. Apple isn't exactly one business. And most companies are. And so, I mean, it's completely rational to think this way. It's just, I just don't want people to get up every day and have this argument. Like, if you think about let's assume that there is some rational value given to the Tesla shareholder that makes them happy, and we move past that event and we get into this merger event, then when we wake up, we talk about what these companies are doing together, not about how they're supposed to operate together.
That's right.
And today, I mean, the best proof of that is to watch people talk about the whole, who owns Terafab.
We want to own it, but we don't want to pay for it.
Yeah.
We'll let somebody else pay for it.
Or we can't pay for it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not one of the reasons that, I'm sorry to say, that on this particular day, this child is going to get more value, right? And the other thing that's interesting about the SpaceX thing is people have SpaceX is, because of it's being pushed out to IPO. And when that happens, there is an incredible hype machine that is generating, value before the IPO. And so we think, oh, Tesla's not getting the love because we see SpaceX is getting the love. Well, it should be, because that's what's going to create the most value in the next 2 or 3 months. Now, the other side of that coin is, who is anybody to say that Tesla isn't cooking hard on all its initiatives? Like, just because we don't hear something doesn't mean it's not happening. And I think that's a very funny thing. It's like, we're starting to see life in the Robotaxi business. We're starting to see movement there. Maybe not as fast as everybody wanted, but is this because Elon's not paying attention to it? I don't think so. I think you just got to let the teams cook and do their thing. So.
And in fact, it's the opposite. When Elon's not paying attention to something, it means it's running very smoothly and progressing as desired.
Exactly. That he has talked about that. And by the way, again, this is an issue as it's like, I take saying, don't put yourself in Elon's shoes and say, oh, he can't possibly spend another Saturday over at Tesla dealing with the FSD or Tesla AI team. Of course he can. I mean, he's not you, man. He's a very unique person. He's got that. We know that he has said repetitively, I put my energies on things that have, that I have to break the constraint. I have a constraint. I see a problem. It's not necessarily a team's having problems, though sometimes it can be, but it's usually limiting factors, things that are in the way. And he puts his energy on that thing. And then, okay, good. I got AI5 out the door. It's taped out. It's going. The chip team is great. Let them bring back samples and test them and continue on that path. And if I don't see it as a crisis, I'm on to the next thing. Like, oh, is Tesla Semi ignored? No, probably the reason Tesla Semi did its thing is because it was operating pretty darn well. Like, once it went through a redesign, we don't know all that happened, but then it got into gear, and or not in the case of the Semi. But
yeah, we have to come up with new ways of describing things, don't we?
Yeah, right. I mean, we use weird, funny car analogies from the combustion engine era.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about TerraSpace.
It's my my favorite article that I've written, I think, since I started writing. Maybe it's my 30th article on stuff, but I mean, the whole idea on TerraSpace is to lay out what I think is effectively, it's like Phil, without presumption, is channeling Elon's energy to write the SpaceX master plan, just like he did with the Tesla master plans over the years. And I'm trying to couch it in terms of connectivity, compute, manufacturing, and then just sort of the whole encompassing energy equation. And I think the key starting point is obviously SpaceX is in the business of space, but I claim that it's really in the business of scale.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we're talking about, like, if we go back to the beginning of this conversation, we're talking about how do we get there? Well, and what is there? Well, we've got this problem with we don't have enough compute to meet the demand. Well, where is that compute going to reside? It's going to reside in space where there's, sort of infinite scale for it to reside. And so I called it TerraSpace, just kind of a cutesy way of grabbing the Terra term until someone starts using the next unit of measurement, I think, and just kind of couched it around that. And it's a fun read. It's definitely master plan-ish, meaning it's don't get too excited and expect hard numbers. This is not a financial analysis of the businesses. It's just sort of like, where is Elon's brain? Where is he going with this? And I think the thing for me is I wanted to write this article to stop the kind of, like, I think SpaceX is a bit misunderstood by the general community. I don't mean just Tesla community. I just mean in general. People are like, okay, I think there's this thing called Starlink. There's satellites that are, this constellation of satellites. There's a space business that I see people getting launched into space. Oh, it seems like they launched their own satellites. I don't get it, and I'm like, no. They figured out why they need satellites, so they're launching them, and they've got that business. So it's a really fun read, I think, and I think when you come away from it, you hopefully feel more educated about the big picture of what the company's trying to achieve. And by the way, it does take a bit of a, like what you have on the screen here is it kind of circles back on various Tesla interconnects. And I think I wrote a covering post on it a couple of weeks ago as well, where I explained what I thought that the Tesla interconnects were. Back to SpaceX and, Optimus is an example, and of course, Terafab itself.
Great. Yeah. So I encourage people to read that. So Phil, it sounds like you and I really then more agree than we disagree. We're not really fighting so much.
Yeah.
But I was prepared. I had Elon come in and break it up. Now, what's funny is he showed up in a Boring Company t-shirt. So maybe that's where the greatest value is. Maybe we're focused on the wrong thing. We're going to need a lot of tunnels on the moon and on Mars. Maybe the tunneling opportunity is the true market.
It's funny you brought this up. I just saw, my wife's in Nashville, and I sent her a post. Boring Company has I don't know, there's some, I didn't really read the details of it, but it's like, hey, here's how we're going to connect into downtown Nashville.
Yeah, and you can take an elevator right from the Boring Company loop right up into your apartment.
Yeah. Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
Like, people, are you getting it yet? Are you getting it yet? Are you getting it yet? It's pretty cool. Yeah.
So the good news is that we're all one big happy family again, Phil.
That's good.
Even though I tried to manufacture a fight today, but we haven't done that.
I don't know what would be the best part of the other side of the fight. I don't know. It's like,
well, the biggest part is the economic side and Tesla shareholders feeling, and I think rightly so. I've tried to advocate a little bit for an opposite view, but I don't. I feel for the quote unquote long suffering Tesla shareholders who have been waiting for years and years for Robotaxi promises to become real. I feel their pain.
Yeah, feel like they're on the cusp of the value unlock there. Yeah,
yeah, but I also sort of want to give perspective on, in the sense that it's Elon's job to maximize the long-term value of Tesla and maximize the long-term value of SpaceX. And ultimately, if he feels that the two company's interests are better together to maximize the long-term value of both of them, then he should make the case for that and put the companies together, or at least put it out there for a shareholder vote.
Yeah.
And obviously he has to be very thoughtful about that, because there's a lot of Tesla shareholders right now that are saying, no, unless my stock doubles or triples, I'm not even interested in this conversation.
Yeah. I think first off, we know that Elon, as far as I know, Elon has never said too much about this merger. He certainly isn't going to say it right now in this particular quiet period up to the IPO. So that's
right.
Not going to happen. I mean, he might tweet about it the day after or whatever. But he hasn't said much. And I agree with you. It's his job to sell that merger if he thinks and maybe he's on the other side of this argument. Maybe he doesn't want the merger, but let's assume he does for sake of argument. Everybody thinks it's a foregone conclusion. So it's his job. It's his job. Let him sell it to the shareholders. And
that's right.
If he makes the case, I have this weird, I think that some people do feel like maybe, what's going to happen this IPO? People are going to sell all their Tesla shares to buy some SpaceX shares and get in on the other child. And I actually don't think, I think it's the stronger the sentiment towards the merger is, the more Tesla stock will start increasing in price, kind of starting to lockstep with a pretend merger value or something, I don't know. But I think it's just sort of like the Muskonomy will dawn on people, and people say, how do I get a piece of the Muskonomy? And, wait a minute. If I get this piece of the Muskonomy called Tesla, which I can get into, if SpaceX is too rich for my blood or my bank account, then so be it. I'm sure that maybe the merger will come and I'll be rewarded, so, it's really funny because imagine if Tesla was trading at $550, I don't think we'd be having this discussion.
Yeah, no, the stock price matters, certainly.
Yeah.
And a lot of people feel like they are in the stock at a price, where it is now, and they feel like they haven't gotten any return on their investment.
Right.
And so there's a lot of shorter term focus. One of the things I've rallied against a little bit is this notion that the longer term shareholders are owed something special, that they need to get this return on investment before they can consider anything else. Mm-hmm. But the harsh reality with investing in any stock is the market doesn't care whether you've owned the stock for 5 minutes or 5 years.
That's right. Yeah.
Now, in a merger situation where shareholders get to vote, well, obviously those considerations matter. But at the end of the day, it's from Elon's perspective, at least, it's where is the greatest long-term value going to be created? Right. Is it in two separate companies, or is it in one? I think most investors would agree and see that most likely the greatest amount of value is going to be created under one company umbrella.
Yeah, maybe. I think so. I do. Yeah. I think because I think it just cleans it up and it makes it all one sort of product lineage. It all kind of comes together. It becomes clearer. And then Elon can not be diluted on that. And so that's what, and that's not necessarily a direct economic argument, but it is one for the future of the company, which is sort of what you're alluding to. Okay. I think we beat that horse.
We did. Well, we have a special guest joining us today, and he is even more handsome than we are. And even better in real life. So
look how he's dressed compared to how we're dressed.
Oh, very sharp. Yeah, we're too casual.
We don't know how it'll show up on the call, but look at this.
I'm sure impeccably dressed.
Well, then I should go get my jacket.
Yeah, but let me introduce to you Kenyon Wells.
Don't worry, I got the memo about the black T-shirts.
Okay.
We're all good.
Yeah. Well, Kenyon, I'll let you introduce yourself to Phil and our audience.
Hi, my name is Kenyon Wells. I have been a longtime Tesla investor and very interested in a lot of the things that you guys discuss. Known Cern for a while. I have several decades of enterprise IT and product development and product support, both on the making, delivering, and selling side of things. And very engaged right now in both what's going on in the market from a AI perspective as well as a cybersecurity perspective. And when I was talking to Cern, I was just throwing out some of my crazy ideas, and he invited me to the show. So, Phil, it's excellent to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well.
I have watched several of your pieces and read an awful lot of your stuff on X, and it's been great.
Oh, so you're the one.
There's more than one, Phil. There's more than one.
Okay, good.
More than one fan out there of yours.
And as soon as I do my intro, there's a hiccup in my
maybe the best place to start is Kenyon.
So how would you like
to 3 articles here in the last couple of days. And Kenyon, if you want to speak to a couple of these, let me just bring them up here. By the way, I put this together. I wanted to put all 3 of us together here, but even in this version, Kenyon is impeccably dressed.
Yeah,
at least compared to me, anyway.
Hey, I've got a button down on, so
yeah. But Kenyon, perhaps maybe you just want to hit the highlights on this article.
Yeah. So I was referring to it as the final countdown, but really, this is highlighting how the 28 election is going to be so impactful on AI and the whole technology industry. And unfortunately, the way things are shaping up now, technology and AI, and especially data centers, are becoming a highly partisan issue. And that's a problem for us. No matter how the election goes, it is not going to allow a open, honest discussion. It's going to be very difficult to plan and make decisions. All these big multi-year planning processes about the future of AI and everything else, a lot of it's going to come down to politics in the end. So I really believe that we need to move this away from being a partisan issue. And the way to do that is to make it popular with the voters. And right now, a lot of very smart people have been telling these voters that their jobs are going to go away. But don't worry, because everything is going to be so cheap. It's so cheap. Life is going to be better, and you're going to live, in this utopia in the future. I don't think voters buy that. I don't think they're going to buy that, and it just sounds scary. So I really think what the industry needs to do is focus in on things that voters care about. And right now, that's all about affordability. And if we are always saying AI and automation and robotics are going to drive down the cost of things and sort of a positive deflation, if that makes sense, we need to show that. And I think the industry really needs to show, hey, we've saved you some money in your groceries. We've saved you some money in your cost of energy, cost of housing, whatever. These are the things that most of the voters are struggling with. And being promised a set of goods a decade out is not going to garner their votes. Whereas a ban on all data centers nationwide or something like that.
Sir, I was going to say one thing, sir.
Yep.
In the previous part of our conversation, maybe this solves the supply-demand issue of chips.
Yeah, maybe not in the way that we would prefer.
Yeah, exactly.
Kenyon, you cut out a little bit there towards the end, but I guess my question to you is this a little bit like, we're on the path of building out the railway across the country, and we've gotten to, Ohio, and people are saying, well, we're not seeing the benefit of a cross-country railroad yet.
Yeah, very much like that. And even once the track is completely laid, from coast to coast, until there are trains, until those trains are carrying people and cargo and everything else, and they're going on a regular basis, you're not going to see the real benefit. It's going to take some years. But maybe if we can show that you can get mail quicker from California to New York or whatever, some sort of concrete positive impact on voters' lives. So it's not just big sci-fi speculation. And don't get me wrong, I'm a big sci-fi fan, and I think a lot of the things that people are talking about is fascinating. I'm very into the details of the industry and planning for the future, etc. But I think the average American citizen is very much in a show me state. Like, I need to see the benefits. And AI's its adoption is nowhere near as strong as many members of the industry would like to think. And if you talk to your elderly mother or your grumpy uncle or whatever, you'll find most of them barely can spell AI. They'll all bring up the Terminator movies, but other than that, they may not know as much. And, that's going to change and evolve in time. But are they going to learn about it because they're seeing something positive and being told, hey, we're able to deliver you this new service or this new capability or this lower cost because of AI? Or are they going to learn about it by someone who's fear-mongering? And unfortunately, there are fear-mongers related to AI and to the coming future, both within the AI industry as well as politicians.
Right.
And I think that's a big problem. We're playing with fire there as far as an industry overall.
So one of the things that you suggest here is that you're using AI in supply chain. So I was wondering if you can speak to that a little bit. I know that you've got a lot of thoughts and also expertise in that area. So I wonder if you could share that with us.
Yeah, in addition to speaking to logistics, I should probably be speaking about the great service that Verizon is delivering to my house. There was some form of accident on the road outside, and there were a bunch of Verizon trucks pulling up cables, and I figure that's probably the reason why I keep coming and going. So my apologies. But on the logistics side, look, every product, every good gets moved from place to place. It gets stored someplace. It has to be produced someplace. All the supplies to create it have to get moved and stored and then delivered exactly on time. And then things eventually have to make it all the way to the store or the delivery location, depending on how you're gaining that good or service. Transport and logistics impact everything. And Cern, you've done some outstanding work on robo-trucking and looking at how Tesla's new semi and robotaxis and everything else can really have a material impact both on Tesla's business but also the U.S. economy. And I think we are all collectively underestimating the value of the full Tesla, and maybe, depending on I listened to the last couple of minutes of your previous conversation, the overall Muskonomy sort of platform or ecosystem. Because being able to buy a robo-truck from one company and a robot from another, and the software to drive them from another, and power and charging from another, that's going to slow down adoption and add additional cost. Whereas if you're able to say, okay, I'm going to buy your trucks because they're the best, and clearly they're going to be the best product in that category out there. As soon as that company is also selling robots, and those androids can help you stock the shelves, manage your warehouse, and load the trucks. And I got to figure those are some of the earliest use cases that are going to apply because they are both relatively easy to train the bot to do, and the risks associated with that particular use case are very low. So, I mean, they might drop a box, as opposed to your human warehouse workers who've never dropped a box. So I suspect if you're a company, whether a retail, manufacturer, shipper, whatever, you're going to want to purchase, both the transport itself, the trucks, and potentially some of the cars, as well as the androids and other automation from one company. And when they're both run by the same operating system, and you can command both of them, and you've got all of that stuff fully integrated from the get-go because it's coming from the same company, that is going to be a combination that is extremely difficult to compete with. And I think you'll see that in a number of spaces. Anywhere that it's not just autonomous vehicles and not just bots, not just clean energy, but where you need 2 or 3 more of those, Tesla's value proposition becomes very, very difficult to compete with. And I think the adoption will go very quickly. but that is going to have very quick impact on the cost of everything. You can drop at the cost of everything by a couple of percentage points. And if you look at some of the groceries and stuff, especially fruits and vegetables and other perishables, the cost of transport, especially frozen transport or whatever, is a huge part of the cost.
Right. Of course it is.
Yeah. And if you get the same androids that are either on the truck or in your store, as soon as the truck pulls up and the door opens up, they know exactly what to pull out of what crate and put where on what shelf immediately. And then they can either get on the truck and leave again, or if they're your in-store bot, you continue to use them for other things like the mess in aisle 5 or whatever. I think that it's going to make reduce the friction on acquiring and moving things and storing things so much that will be one of the fastest paths to reducing costs for the average consumer.
So it sounds like what you're saying is there's a bit of a threading the needle here, because if you can show economic benefit without economic pain to the consumer, the potential voter, you can make some headway on the use cases, right? The further like downstream stuff, like eventually Tesla Semi is going to drive itself.
I heard you saying economic benefit.
Yeah. So what I was getting at is, sounds like we're trying to thread the needle a bit here, and it's appropriate to do so, which is that you need to show economic benefit without economic pain. And what I mean by threading the needle is that the more parts of this ecosystem were autonomous, the more fear of work displacement. I mean, like, for example, the headline out of Tesla shouldn't be Tesla Semi is great because it's going to get rid of truck drivers.
Yeah.
It should be more about, this is a more efficient platform to move goods and services, and then something tangible that shows, XYZ company is reducing the cost of something that's
right. And that's a perfect example, because there's an incredible shortage of truck drivers. It's not just, we're going to eliminate the needs for truck drivers. Maybe eventually you will, but there's going to be a long transition period. Right. And right now they can't hire enough to get this. So you're augmenting the current workforce, allowing the current workforce to do more. And that needs to be the messaging. That needs to be how these companies are both selling their products, as well as the companies that are implementing them, if they're different. Yeah. The ones that are buying it, no more CEOs saying, hey, we're cutting 10% of the workforce due to AI. This is a personal thing. And actually, I should have started off by saying everything I'm going to say is my personal opinion, not the opinion of my company or anyone else. And none of this is financial advice. Cern can give financial advice, not me. But no more CEOs on earnings calls saying we're cutting 10% because of AI. A significant cut to your salary is showing either a failure in your business or a failure of leadership. And when I say a failure of your business, maybe you can cut 10% with the AI, robotics, automation, etc. Or you can add all that and do 10% more and grow your top line by more than 10. Grow your bottom line by more than 10.
Do you remember the interview with Jensen on this topic with Jim Cramer by any chance?
I don't remember that one. I quote Jim
Cramer asked him the following question. He said, with AI, Jim Cramer's on CNBC. He asked, with AI, it seems like a lot of people are talking about reducing something, taking away workers, and shouldn't we be using AI to do more with more, and Jensen violently agreed with it. And he said, Cramer asked him, why isn't that the reality? And he said, because leadership lacks imagination. In other words, they don't know how to grow their businesses with this beautiful productivity tool. They just know how to deal with the bottom line, not the top line so much. And it was an interesting point. And I think, and there's not like an easy grab there, because, lack of imagination isn't something you instill in somebody by snapping your fingers. But it is important for, I think, for companies to realize that there's more opportunity
Yep.
with AI, not just the opportunity to, remove workers from some tasking, whether they're white collar or blue collar.
I prefer, in talking to clients or anyone else about AI, it's not about cost cutting, it's about efficiency or the ability to handle more scale. And yes, efficiency can translate to cost cutting, but it can also translate to delivering the service faster, delivering more of that service or good, to reaching more markets, to selling to new people. And the companies that will thrive and the individuals that will thrive are the ones that look at AI as a tool to do more, not to cut, not to do less. And, we're going to see who in the marketplaces rise and falls. That's the joy of American capitalism. But I'm really concerned about how all this is being messaged now by the leaders, by all these CEOs, by the media, and by everyone else, because we're already seeing proposed bans on data center construction, restrictions on AI, increased liability for AI. Those things can be highly charged and yet gain votes. And if they gain votes nationally, that's a problem. It's a big problem. It's a problem if one particular state puts a ban in place. If Maine succeeded in banning data centers, for example, that would be a problem for Maine. But if it were a nationwide ban, it would be a problem for the U.S. And I'm afraid that is coming if we're not careful.
I think it's important also to broaden the perspective that it's not so much AI is the point here. It's about generally the economic engine of technology, because and it just happens to be that is AI today. Yes. And that is the thing. But what you're saying is it can stunt the growth of basically us moving ahead technologically. AI is just that particular tool of the day, du jour, right?
Yep. And AI might be the biggest single technological advancement we've seen, but it certainly won't be the last. And some of the later ones might be bigger. We don't know.
Yeah,
we can't really see that far down the road. What's freaking everybody out the most, I think, is the speed with which this is happening and the confusion, the inability to keep up. I'm a technologist by heart, by school, by decades of doing this job. I can barely keep up with what's going on in AI. If this isn't your job, if you're not fully focused on it, you've got some 9-to-5 job doing something else, it all just sounds scary. The truths you were told last year about what AI could and couldn't do are no longer valid. Even the names, the techniques, the companies are totally different now. And that is confusing to many people. And confused voters tend to vote pretty conservatively, but not politically, but I mean as far as risk averse.
Right.
So when we think about this 2028 timeline, we have Tesla rolling out Robotaxi. And so they can make great strides between now and November 2028.
Yep.
Is that kind of the clearest pathway in your mind to showing some wins for the consumer?
Focusing first on the Muskonomy, robotaxis for the cost of personal transport, potentially robotaxis for home delivery on various things, which is a huge market in of itself, especially if you get the last 50 feet with a robot. Also, robot trucking that we've been talking about from the semi. Reduced cost for energy. Again, big part of the data center problem is the cost of electricity. And while more and more companies are saying, if I build the data center, I'm going to provide the power one way or another, in general, energy cost is still too high. And the quickest path to getting there is more batteries. So Tesla Energy right there. And you've got Starlink, reducing the cost for telecom, reducing the cost for internet access. And it hasn't hit yet, but Starlink will be expanded into multiple other markets.
Right.
and it will eliminate the need for many other things, especially the Starlink for cellular. How every American citizen, one of their top 10 costs is probably their cell bill.
Yes.
And their at-home internet. These are material things that we already have solutions for, that those solutions are being scaled. Can we bring them to the U.S. citizenry, and can we highlight what is bringing that, so that they're connecting the dots of, oh, my cost of cellular went down, my cost of my food, my dinner being delivered went down. Those are all connected to AI. Well, that's kind of a complex messaging. I think it's highly possible, but companies need to be singing from that hymn book.
Very much so.
Yeah. We've lost him again.
If anybody at Starlink is watching, please send Kenyon
one mini kit or one residential kit.
Yeah. Speaking
of telecom, I was just saying Starlink is going to crush all the current cell companies, and Verizon shut me off.
We were just, yes, they did that on purpose. We were just, in your absence, we were just talking about how you need a Starlink.
Okay. I do, and trust me, I've already had that conversation with my wife after this most recent hiccup. The worst part is, even since it's Verizon, I'm getting my FiOS, my wired internet, and when that goes down, everyone in the neighborhood tries to use their cell. So suddenly we get cell jams too.
Yeah. Hotspot galore.
So just in terms,
Starlink.
Yeah. So just in terms, again, just focus on Robotaxi for a minute. Some of the other things you talked about, right? Like autonomous trucking. I don't think that's going to happen much between now and 2028. It seems like that's going to be,
50,000 a year. It's going to take a while for them to ramp to that, and that's not going to have a needle for several years.
Yeah, and that's not even autonomous version of semi. They're not quite there yet. I know that they're testing it. Are they testing it at enough scale to roll it out anytime soon? Probably not.
I don't think they've sold enough of them. I mean, Elon's great trick, one of his great tricks, is to get people to pay to be his testers, right? And they're not that far yet. I haven't got it. They're only now beginning to sell them at scale.
So on the Robotaxi front, then, we appear to be on the cusp of being able to roll that out. Tesla has opted for the path of, most caution, that they don't want to have any accidents if they can. They don't want to have any deaths, where in reality, in the transportation world, accidents and deaths are just part of the equation. And the goal, obviously, is to try to minimize them. Is Tesla being too cautious? In light of your concerns around 2028 and what could happen with the election, should Tesla look to accelerate deployment? So what are your thoughts on that in terms of how they should balance those two issues?
Well, as a shareholder, I would love them to accelerate the deployment.
Yeah.
But also as a long-term shareholder, especially considering the media's distaste with Tesla and many of the
he talks about Verizon companies or the media, and he gets shut off right away.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to fill the gap here and say that the other side of that coin, of course, with cybercab is, any accident is an AI accident, right?
Yeah.
So
yes, they should accelerate it. But I don't have access to any of the data they're seeing, and if they're really concerned that someone would get killed, of course they should wait.
Yeah.
Yes.
But we've seen none of that. The incidents we have seen have been so small. I have to question if they're worried that the safety controls or whatever they have in place now don't scale for some reason.
I don't think safety is the problem anymore.
I would hope not.
Yeah. I think they're just dealing with the long tail of operational related things.
But now they talked about the whole fleet getting turned on one day, and we're should be almost there. I won't be really concerned, Cern, to answer your question directly, unless by the end of the year, we're still not fully rolling out.
Yeah.
I suspect they're going to roll it out geographically more than people think. I think the triangle of the three big Texas cities was the perfect start, where you can do both the cities, the cross-city highway stuff, as well as all the suburbs all the way around.
Mm-hmm.
Between that, that's a big chunk of the second largest economy in the U.S., right? And they would be able to gain experience across every different type of environment by doing that. I suspect they would roll it out that way rather than the handful per city that we've seen so far. We'll have to see how it goes. But I do think that Elon is in one of the best positions to be able to demonstrate the true value of automation and AI in the quickest way. There are other companies, and even if everything isn't in place, some of those companies may choose to reduce costs because they know their costs are about to come down, and maybe they're not going to be the first ones to roll out, robo-trucking or whatever, but they know they're going to do it next year, and they think Pepsi's going to do it this year. So they better drop their prices now to match. So you can see some of that benefit before everything is fully rolled out, but companies have to really feel confident that it is about to be there, or feel enough friction in the marketplace, threaten the marketplace, that they go ahead and take that risk. So we'll see what happens.
Well, let's transition from that then to wooden shoes and Dutch disease. Could you share with us what you're talking about here?
So most people aren't econ geeks like me, but many of you've probably heard something about Dutch disease, which is basically where you have one industry crowd out the other industries in your economy. And it's called Dutch disease because in the 60s in the Netherlands, they discovered natural gas, and that turned into this massive industry that quickly made the cost of doing anything else in the Netherlands higher. They couldn't get all the best people to work in other industries because they were all going where the money was. And this has happened again and again in resource-rich economies where they still end up having a very consolidated economy and a not very competitive economy. And eventually that means a poor economy. We're beginning to see that here in this country with AI. Now, different in that the AI industry, at least so far, isn't crowding out from a labor perspective, and maybe isn't crowding out from a transport perspective and all these other things that the traditional Dutch disease would happen. But it absolutely is crowding out where investment dollars are going, the attention, both the media and potential investors and everything else, where people are focused, and again, the fear, uncertainty, and doubt around where things are going to be. So if you're trying to start a company, whether it's a restaurant or you're going to build widgets or you're going to build planes or whatever, now's not a great time to start that company in this country. Because most of the investment dollars are going to something related to AI. Getting investors even interested in whatever your new business is going to be difficult because all the investors want to talk about the latest with AI. And even if they're not investing in AI now, they're concerned enough about what tomorrow will bring that it makes it much more difficult. And just the sheer amount of money that is being spent on the data center build out and the hyperscalers, I mean, it's amazing. And it should be wonderful because we've privatized our national infrastructure build out, assuming it works. But we need to shift from this narrative of the hyperscalers are all that matter, that the biggest companies are the only ones that are really going to thrive in our new AI world. The metaphor that is thrown around a lot is the gold rush one of the people who really make the money are the sellers of the picks and shovels. Well, that's probably true up to now. The NVIDIAs and others who provide that, the tokens, the data centers and all that, and companies that offer you equipment to promote that build out. Up to now, that is where the money's really been spent. But that's going to change, and that's going to change quickly. It'll be whatever companies in any industry best leverage AI and robotics are first to market with that new way of doing things. And investors need to go from just asking, all right, well, how much are you spending on AI, to asking much more targeted and informed questions so that those companies can be valued appropriately. Where if a company is a year ahead of all of its competitors in embracing AI, if they're going to be some of the first to get the first 1,000 robots, well, that company deserves to be more highly valued. That company deserves to be rewarded in the market. That's only going to happen if the analyst community and retail investors start asking some of the harder questions. Like, how many of your employees actually have access to an enterprise AI license? How many of them use it every day? What's the average token burn per employee? These are questions that I don't think most of the analyst community would even understand necessarily what the questions are right now, but they need to learn, because those are the kinds of metrics that will show you which companies are going to be successful and profitable next year.
The good news is that because AI is somewhat a horizontal technology, that there should be good, in other words, it's a horizontal productivity enhancer. It doesn't favor necessarily one thing over another. Right now, it favors more white collar tasking because that's where it can be. I mean, we're not in the robotic space yet, widely.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So it seems to me that there's great opportunity for lots of other companies to use the AI products to enhance their productivity and achieve greater value. So it should be a little bit different than the Dutch problem, right?
Yep. It should be.
Yeah.
But that isn't the way it's perceived, and that's not the way it's being rolled out right now. It is a horizontal capability that any company could benefit from, white collar, blue collar, etc. But it's those companies that realize that, invest now, are training their people now, and are changing their business model and what services they're offering with an eye to the future. Those are the ones that are going to be really successful. And unfortunately, back to the investment challenge, it might be hard for many of those companies to get the additional investment, to make the investments, to be better prepared in the future. Because so much of the money is flowing straight to the picks and shovel salesmen, right? To the actual hyperscalers. And a lot of the value will be generated there. And, the Teslas and the Googles and many others aren't just selling tokens. They're now selling a lot of capability on top of their platform, which is great, and they're going to do wonderfully well. But you look at how much money is being invested there and how much of that investment capital they're taking and then turning into fixed assets of data centers or whatever, that is sucking that money away and that attention away and some of the best people away from all these other industries across our economy. Our economy is larger and more diverse than the Netherlands was, and more than most of these countries that suffer from Dutch disease. But we're seeing signs of it. We're seeing trends. And that is concerning, especially if no one is looking at it holistically. Again, if we're at the basic level of AI is good or bad, then we're not looking at the right things.
So how about this question? What we see today is, it's kind of coming back to what I said a moment ago about AI's first more productivity enhancing tool that's behind the screen. It's not necessarily manifesting in robotics and other things with, physical agency, et cetera, right? So what's interesting is, as you get companies, example, SpaceX, you get companies that are doing things that, one of the beautiful things about Tesla and SpaceX, as opposed to the hyperscalers, is that there's a lot of physicalness to the whole thing. And what that means is that there's also a supply chain, and there's all these other people involved in the economy to make those products or services, right? It's not just something like, okay, we bought GPUs from NVIDIA, we put them to work, we built this AI, and it functions behind a screen. In the case of like Optimus, if there's something that happens with Optimus in a big way, then there's this incredible supply chain that explodes. And then all of a sudden people get a piece of this that it's a little bit more democratized across a larger group of people because of the physical nature of it.
Physical manufacturing, the build out of the data centers, all that does share the wealth around a little bit. But is it perceived that way? And is it perceived that way so much in the marketplace? Again, I come back to the voting issues, which is my first article.
Yeah.
If you've got an informed leadership, political or corporate, that is really looking holistically, all these issues can be addressed. AI does not need to be as scary as people are making it out. Yes, it's going to be disruptive, but we faced lots of disruptions before, and we've always come out well. And Cern has just raised my third post, this one on the people side of things. And I was saying this a little bit earlier before, but the utopian, no one will need to work stuff, no one believes that. At least the average voter is not going to believe that. Some people in the technology space probably believe it, but if you're an average U.S. citizen and you aren't as experienced on this stuff, you're going to be asking, well, what are you getting out of from me? What am I paying in order to have this wonderful future life? And what would I do? And how would I differentiate myself from anyone else? And doesn't that sound like communism? Because it does sound like communism. But the nobody will need to work anymore is not the way to look at it. Right. People will still work. I have yet to meet anyone who has gotten to know AI and mastered it and then said, oh, I work half time now because AI is doing everything. No, you end up doing more because you can do more.
Right. And that is the more with more argument. Yeah.
I do suspect there will be a social safety net that will be higher than the one we have currently.
Right.
Because we will be able to afford it. There will be no one needs to starve. Basic medical care and all that. We can absolutely get there. But the majority of people are still going to work. And they're still going to want to work. And as long as human nature remains the way it is, and it might change eventually, but it's going to be a while, you're still going to want to make more than your brother-in-law or that annoying neighbor down the street that you see at the barbecue. Mm-hmm. That's just inherent in human nature. You want a newer car than them, or if we're no longer driving cars, you want a newer whatever. That is the way people are. So let's back off on this utopian stuff that most people won't buy and focus back on, think of how much more you can do. How much more you can do today. And I think some of those areas where AI can now help you do your taxes, better organize your household, manage your personal budget, those are the kinds of things that people will see. And those are the kinds of things that maybe it's not job driven, but if they start seeing real benefits there, then they can start applying it in their job, or at least thinking about what the future holds. And again, I love many of the big brain people in our industry and how much they're thinking 10 years ahead. I think we need to think about the next 3 years, and we can get through this. It's not going to be that bad if we identify what the real issues our country and our society are facing and then address them. And if the government's going to address them, fantastic, that's their job. The government may not address all of them. And then either companies or individuals or other associations will need to step in and address them. Though I don't think countries or governments are going anywhere. So I suspect it will still need to be there.
We've talked about, Kenyon, sort of Tesla and Robotaxi and their role in all this. Share with us maybe what you think the hyperscalers could do over the next 3 years to really bring the benefits of AI to the masses.
So the hyperscalers, can do a lot. Some of them touch individual consumers more than others. Certainly, AWS, as a hyperscaler, is part of the bigger Amazon family. How many households does Amazon touch? In my case, every day, considering all the packages that get delivered here. But I think most households, at least a couple times a month, somehow Amazon is touching them.
Yeah.
You see their trucks all the time. And if their messaging shifted slightly, and they're like, we're implementing this, and what that is going to mean is either their delivery is quicker or we're reducing costs by this much or whatever. That's one way. Google touches an awful lot of consumers in another way. Apple touches an awful lot of consumers in another way. But in every case, the messaging should be more AI is a direct benefit to you now, in this coming year and next year. And it is reducing your cost, improving how much goodness and products and services or speed that you're getting. And we can do it now. And I think all these companies have those stories. They have that narrative because I see what many of these companies are doing and implementing. I partner with many of them in my consulting role. And they just need to get to that point where they feel more comfortable saying, hey, we're implementing AI. It's not about cutting jobs. It's about doing more. Mm-hmm. It's about delivering better quality goods, services, delivering them faster, delivering them to more people, delivering them in better places. And that is not that different from the messaging they've been doing up to now, but it is a little slight tangent off of how they're communicating things. And certainly in the investor space, I know, Cern, I'm sure both of you listen to an awful lot of earnings calls. So do I. And the conversation is always cut costs, cut costs, cut costs, cut costs. And that sounds scary.
Good point. Well, speaking of cutting, Phil wrote this post about Tesla's ether loop in the Cybercab.
I was reading it earlier today, actually, Phil.
Yeah. How do you like that for a tangent, right? That was a good segue.
Yeah, wow, you just took a right turn and tried to connect the dots there, didn't you?
That's right. Just right turn in the Cybercab,
yeah.
the golden car. And Phil, I'll let you talk about this, but my joke on this was the best wire is no wire. Mm-hmm. Hundreds of pounds of wiring eliminated. There's this guy carrying the wire away. Anyway, Phil, perhaps you want to fill us in a little bit, and then Kenya, I'd like your reaction to it.
Well, it's a really cool thing. I mean, this is what we did at Rivian as well. We did not specifically Ether Loop, which is a specific application of using Ethernet in the car, but essentially, at the physical level, we're talking about using one very small wire to transmit a bunch of data and potentially power around the car, and eliminating give or take 80 to 100 pounds of wires, heavy, expensive wiring from a wiring harness. You've ever seen a car kind of disassembled, these teardowns, you see these massive wiring harnesses. And
shout out to Sandy Monroe.
Yeah, exactly. Good teardowns that it's done. But the idea here is really, really different. And it is that, and by the way, I want to talk about how it manifests in Cybercab, which I think is really quite awesome. But at the network technology, basically what we have kind of what's called a zonal architecture, right? Which means that there's only a couple key higher level computer elements on the wire that are directly connected to this Ethernet, and all the rest of the little things that hang off it, door controllers and window controllers and all that, they're kept in the past, literally in the past, using what is known as CAN interfaces. And so they built this thing, Tesla built this thing called ETHLoop, and they had a lot of different goals. One of it was, let's reduce the complexity of the wiring harness. 2, let's reduce the cost of the vehicle. 3, let's increase the reliability and safety of the vehicle using the specific implementation of it, which is what they call EtherLoop, which is what the patent refers to in the linked article. And by doing that, what you really is like, you're leaning forward from what legacy auto did in the past with this stuff to something that becomes this beautiful little piece of wire that runs around that delivers you effectively a robot. You know what I mean? A reliable robot, which is ultimately kind of its destination. And what's super interesting about Cybercab is we have to think about how Cybercab was developed here and why this becomes a benefit to Cybercab specifically over the other cars like the Model Y and the Model 3. And I don't talk about it here, but I mean in the article or in the post, but I will say it here, is that Cybercab has developed as with the unbox process. What you've got major assemblies that snap together. Okay, the vehicle. And the cool part about that is when they snap together at the wiring and power, it's literally like two little connects that connect together at this point. It's not all these wires that have, and by the way, if it was a wiring harness, now you'd have to break the wiring harness into these sub-assemblies within these major components and have a whole bunch of connection points, like when you connected this component to this. So think of Cybercab as possibly 4 only major components of the vehicle. Then they kind of come together at the last minute in manufacturing. Well, now all you've got is really Ethernet and power that connect. And because it's zonal, that zonal architecture, meaning that you basically have compute surfaces in each of the major assemblies. So you're just connecting those things, then fan out to the little door controllers and seat controllers and all those little things. So it's a big deal, and this kind of started years ago with Tesla, but I think you can see today, and I specifically talking about Cybercab, is the incredible payoff to this benefit that this architecture that we're starting to see in this product. And certainly, I think kind of probably leaned forward on this most was Cybertruck. Cybertruck, regardless of its ultimate sales and stuff, was a lot of new tech that got in that vehicle. It became, like 48 volt, for example, that made its way into Cybercab. And I think most of this architecture finds its way into semi as well. Right. So, it's where the industry should be. Tesla's on the leading edge, and companies like Rivian have done a pretty good job at this as well.
So you wanted me to respond, sir?
Oh, yeah. So, sure.
No.
Yeah.
First off, other than the fact that I get bad flashbacks from my networking class from the early 90s when I hear the word Ethernet, other than that, this is just a fantastic thing. And what I find shocking is how far behind the rest of the industry is. Not just they've always traditionally been behind, but how many years ago did Elon, when they rolled out the Cybertruck and he told them to change their wattage and their wires and everything else.
Yeah.
And how many of them have done any of it?
No.
I don't see them other than the Chinese.
Yeah.
Which is shocking.
It's part of this, there's a reason, I think. And I think the reason comes down to the way Legacy puts together cars versus the way a fully vertically integrated company like Tesla does. Legacy buys major components from suppliers and assembles those components together. Okay. So they don't really have the ability to build a new software-defined architecture for the vehicle because they're dealing with systems that essentially exist in certain ways, aren't going to change unless you insert massive NRE dollars into these suppliers. They're going to keep things the way they have traditionally been. And so if you're not willing to make that holistic transitional investment, which none of Legacy is, because Legacy isn't built to do it that way. They're built to just be assemblers of major supply chains. Then you're not going to get the benefit of this.
Yep.
So it's really, really hard for them to take this point of view because they'd say, well, wait a minute, what do we need to do? Oh, okay. What you need to do is completely re-architect the vehicle, and you need to completely rejigger your entire supply chain. And oh, by the way, you'll get this benefit downstream. And we know they just don't really operate that way, right? So what they effectively become is, I don't know how else to say it, but left behind, and there, in my opinion, there is no path that I see for them to catch up, like none.
Unfortunately, I agree with you.
Yeah, I know. I say it too, in a way. unfortunately. I mean,
Yeah, and I do want to your point, it's very hard for organizations in a mature industry to suddenly reinvent themselves.
absolutely.
Almost no companies can do it. And there's long list of companies that have the buggy whip manufacturers and whatnot. Their industry changes and they're just not ready for it, and they go under and new players come in. But finding a path forward is leadership's job.
Well, that's...
And they started this discussion several years back. None of this should be a surprise to them. And they've seen Tesla do it at scale.
Yeah.
And they should have bought a Cybertruck, torn it down themselves, looked at how much the tech has changed. And after they change their underwear, they can get to, all right, we're going to change a lot of things about our business.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's management's responsibility.
Well, guess what? It's poor leadership.
I will also say that those same leaders were distracted by the big union confrontation and then the after effects with it. I mean, the timing of that for that industry is pretty terrible.
But you know what's crazy about that too? I mean, outside of like looking at unionization of suppliers, the benefit to legacy could have always been the story internally that we're going to do more in-house and build a bigger workforce to do all these different things. I mean, there's plenty of ways to sell that, and they aren't even just complete sales pitches. They are, I mean, look at Elon hasn't decided to lay off a bunch of people because suddenly he's doing these things. He's starting to build a bigger piece of the pie slowly, and ultimately will hire a lot more people. So in a way, there's a very saleable. I mean, the problem too is, in a certain respect, is it's sort of the way things are done. I think like a friend of mine was talking about that joined Rivian when I was there. He was at McLaren before that, and he was talking to some of his friends that worked at BMW, and he said, and we were talking ICE EV, that whole endless loop. And he's saying, look, there are people that have worked at BMW for 20, 25 years that are into eking out 1% more efficiency in the combustion engine every product cycle. That is what they're going to go to their retirement on. They're not going to, they're not changing their ways. So, it's very difficult to make those changes, but you just got to have the will to do it. I mean, if you don't get into the business of putting yourself out of business, someone else is going to put you out of business.
Yep. And senior leaders at a company, they're stewards both of their shareholders' dollars,
right,
but also their employees.
Yeah.
And it's their responsibility to try to carve a new path. And I could see several of them tried, but it's amazing that I don't see any of them have succeeded. And that's going to be really terrible.
It's so, my experience with this is when I was at Rivian, we attempted to do some deals we attempted to do a deal with General Motors, a massive deal. It was rejected actually by Rivian because of the way it would change Rivian's business. This is before Rivian had product, selling. And then we did do a deal with Ford. And the idea was to kind of build to use the Rivian technology and to build a Skunk Works team inside Ford to reimagine how they might build vehicles. And in some interesting way, that was actually a pretty well-constructed relationship. But at the end of the day, there's massive body reject. It is like you're entering the system as an unwanted virus when you do something like this. And every institutionalized thing that has existed. And how do I know this? Well, sitting in a room with a bunch of Ford guys who were their cream of the crop. And by the way, I'm not saying they're not smart guys, okay? But they came to bear with how they had proceeded over the last 20 years of their career to reach that critical moment. And they're not sitting in a place like Silicon Valley. And one of the things that like a company like Rivian did, and of course, Tesla's its own unique thing because it kind of started here. I'm in Silicon Valley, started here and just sort of, from the mind of Elon is going to go that way. in the case of Rivian actually started in suburban Detroit, but it was through the mind of the CEO, again, leadership, who specifically came to Silicon Valley and said, basically the entire brain of this car is coming from Silicon Valley, and Detroit, the Detroit ecosystem will contribute to the physicality of the powertrain and so forth. And, he was very clear in that and kept his mind on that and built the teams out here. And then ultimately would intimate to us, the teams, that, you guys are the important part of this car. I mean, obviously it is a combined effort and you have to see it that way. But, it's a very different mindset. And so trying for us to work with these legacy autos, it's just, you get them, how do I say it? You get them hot and bothered to the concept of what this could be. And by the way, a lot of these employees get excited about it too. But then once it fans out, unless there's somebody at the top in leadership pushing it,
Yep.
With sometimes carrot, sometimes stick, but a heck of a lot of stick.
Yeah.
It just it just dies in the center of the company.
Someone who's willing to break a few eggs. I mean,
yeah, absolutely. And by the way, of course, we all know it's easier for a startup because there ain't no eggs to really break. You're starting with breaking their eggs. So it works better that way. Or the outcomes are easier because there's less, it's funny. It's a full circle conversation here, isn't it? Because when you started talking about the political rejection, the body reject of potentially AI. And in a sense, we're actually talking about the same thing. It requires leadership to move the populace forward, to make them understand how this benefits their lives over the long term. And it's a long-term investment. And outside of that, without that leadership, and sometimes it emerges with, some good politician, somebody from the Hill, but the shining hill, that is, not the not the other one.
I live just outside of Washington, D.C.,
okay.
so that hill talk about.
Not that hill, yeah. But yeah, I mean, you get what I'm saying is that it require, ultimately for me, it comes down to leadership, and both sides of these things, whether it's politics or it's large companies that need to change. And we don't really have too many examples of large companies that have done that pivot, that are outside the original. Cern and I talked about this, is like, one of the things that's really cool is, or one of the things that's really beneficial is, try to invest in companies who are led by their founders.
Yeah.
Because those are the people that, look at Elon. There's one of the issues with Elon we constantly see, we talk about, is, just when we are about to arrive, Elon pulls the carpet out and starts some new big initiative, right? Well, guess what, folks? This is the reality. Elon is both dictating reality and reacting to reality. And so we can say, we should just stop here, and he should focus on advertising and making EVs take over ICE, and that's the business. Or he can say, no, that's not the business. The real business is autonomy for vehicles, and ICE gets put to bed anyway because of that, right? Or the real business is this for the company, just go in on full autonomy, humanoid plus, vehicle, and think of the vehicle as not something that is a human-driven object, right? And when he pushes those buttons and he says those things, there's a lot of investors that are like uncomfortable because they're like, oh, wait a minute, we were just about to arrive at the door, and now, we're on to this new thing. Well, sometimes he's bringing us there, and we should be happy that he is, versus where you might sit with legacy.
I can speak to the founder thing from personal experience. I work at a large IT consulting company called CGI, and our founder, who founded the company in the 70s, mm-hmm. is still our chairman and is still very actively engaged. And that spirit, soul, whatever you want to say, of the organization is still there.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that is because he's still so actively engaged.
Right.
Not all of it, But because of that difference in this industry, I've been in the company for more than 30 years, and many of the people I work with have been there for decades. And that is rare in our industry. And I give it right back to, this company is different. Just listen to the founder.
Yeah, and it's not just the idea of a founder-led company. It's specifically a certain type of founder.
Yes.
I mean, now the good news is
a transformational leader.
Yeah, I mean, founders that give companies effectively large, ultimately large market caps and reach escape velocity tend to be the ones that we cherry pick here. Obviously, founders who lead failed companies, we don't see them anymore, so it's really not there. But it's like look at what happened to Google. Google, I don't know, it was less than 2 years ago. I can never get the numbers right or the timelines right. Things are moving so quickly, but Google was like, oh my God, it's going to be left behind in AI.
Yeah.
Stuck in the advertising for URL business, where's it going? And one or two of the, I can't remember, was it just Sergey or was it one of the two or both of the founders came back and sort of effectively infused their demands again and transformed the company. And that's a pretty big deal. I mean, and I don't think it could have happened without their involvement.
I find it interesting that we started talking about wiring and now we're talking about leadership. Interesting how that goes.
If I can Cern, sorry, if I can go back to a wiring thing.
Yeah.
I think many of the companies now planning on building out androids and other forms of robots are, going to be hit with the same, punch in the face that the automotive companies have run into from Tesla because of these experiences.
Yep.
If you look at how things evolved from the Roadster to the S to the X to the 3 to the Y, and then Cybertruck was so radically different. And it was largely a technical or technology demonstration platform. Sold some, and hopefully it'll sell more. But everything sort of culminated there. And then the Cybertaxi is even more. It's even taking all of those things that you saw, sort of brute force approach implemented in the Cybertruck, elegantly implemented here. Now, all of that experience, that ability to reduce wiring and the connections and make things easier to manufacture, will all be applied into Optimus.
Yep.
And companies never had to reduce all this wiring cost because weight didn't matter as much until you went electric. Well, if it was important to running electric cars, it's going to be really important to these robots that run, electrically, and
smaller batteries
are all going to have to balance all that weight on 2 feet.
Yep, exactly. No, I mean, it's we've always said that Tesla has, I think Elon's quite patient with Optimus because he's basically trying to infuse all this complete integration, vertical integration into this product. And, that leads to capability and manufacturability, which gives it the opportunity to really scale. I mean, it's actually both things, right? If you have an amazing capability, then you get more horizontal scale from the bot as its brain increases. As you get, it's like, yes, this thing can do surgery because it's not necessarily on V1, but I used the wrong numbers there. Some version of it, because it has the dexterity and the potentiality of having the right brain. But guess what? We can also scale it because we can manufacture the hell out of these things.
Yep.
And I think the other part of it is that because it's really, really different than auto. I mean, auto has a mature supply chain. If you go back to that wiring article, one of the things that's true is that there's all these legacy components that are all on this CAN bus, right? And they're all fingered out. And people if you look at some responses like, well, why doesn't Tesla just go and vertically integrate those pieces? And it's like, it's not worth their time really, because, the window controller is so generic. Like, you can get to it if you need to get to it. If you can come up with a way that's going to save you $100 a vehicle, do it. Otherwise, forget about it. Just leave it where it is. But you have a very different problem with Optimus, where it's pretty much entirely new. And so you don't need to carry any legacy with it, which is beneficial. On the other side of that coin is that, everything's new. Everything's new. And so you're going to a supplier and you're saying, if you want to supply this thing, you got to go make it for the first time. It's not like pick it off a shelf and it has a part number. So yeah, it's a different thing. And hopefully if the demand is there, which I think it'll be off the charts, then Tesla will have, enormous advantage once it gets to that scale.
Phil, is this ether loop technology going to be used for bots to communicate with each other when they're close to each other? Is that going to be the?
Oh no, I don't think between them. No, I mean I think that's just the function of.
It's the internal circulatory system.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
It's not anything external when bots are in close quarters.
Yeah, I think I love the way you just said that, internal circulatory system, because it will be more about interconnecting. I mean, they'll reuse this. There's no doubt, because you'd want to use it. Okay, what would you want to do? You'd want to use Ethernet for moving lots of data through this thing between all its, controlling extremities, right? Let's imagine a controller in the forearm that is, articulating all the elements, right? So you'd want to use Ethernet to connect that, but you also one of the pieces that Tesla did something interesting here, that they did this sort of time division idea where every controller has a fixed address and it gets time on the wire. In other words, it has a slot at which it is allowed to transmit its data, and they're all synchronized. All of them know about this. And the advantage of that is it creates a great system reliability, right? A system reliability. It's super important in vehicle because he's coming and going here, isn't he? Yep. Yeah. It's super important in vehicle because, safety, right? Safety. But the second the bot starts carrying a child down the stairs or doing surgery, I think we'll feel this. We'll feel the safety thing, right, full front and center again, right?
Yeah. So
yes.
what's the main technology then for bots to communicate with each other when they're all in a group in the same room, for example?
Yeah, I suspect that they'll just apply that as a cloud interconnect. In other words, basically they'll communicate through a synchronized sort of intelligent fleet manager. We'll call it a fleet manager in the cloud. Okay. So what I've said repetitively is that Optimus will want to be on the network, right? Yeah. It will probably have Wi-Fi in building and probably 5G. Ultimately connect through Starlink mobile, but it will communicate to some sort of orchestration element in the cloud, and that orchestration element will be able to manage subfleets. So if let's say you had 300 distributed on a manufacturing floor, and then you could subdivide those fleets. Obviously, that's you may be leasing them. I don't know. We don't know the business model here, but let's assume you're leasing them. Tesla will say, well, they're on the network and they'll use part of our fleet management thing. And, you get in there and you use that tool to maybe organize how you break up the workday across the fleet. But it's also the way that they can coordinate amongst themselves to know that they've done things. It may be that sometimes they work the way you and I work, which is I talk to you or I communicate, like it's not out of the question that there is a point here where they're just doing it the way we do it as humans, coordinate as we do it as humans. But the most likely reality is that they're just silently communicating through some cloud interconnect would be the guess. I don't think they'll be doing peer-to-peer connectivity.
And that fleet management software goes back to the logistics conversation we were having earlier. Having that software, whether it is Grok or a different type of solution that ties together the automotive to the robot, means either one is in a much better competitive position in their respective market. Because now you can get them both. They're pre-integrated. They work together. They talk to each other. that's a huge benefit.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, it's just as you started talking about like unloading the semi, right? And you're like thinking about that and you're like, okay, what does that mean? Well, you need to know where the semi is. The semi needs to communicate what load it's carrying. Like what is the physics, like this is truck number 6, we know what the manifest, we know what's in there. We know what has to happen to the stuff that's inside that thing. And maybe it has to get pushed out to a bunch of cyber cabs who then drive it down the street or something. Right. So it's this whole, that's why I led with the concept of fleet management as opposed to calling it something else, because it is managing these fleets and subfleets of robotic entities. Some of them have wheels, some of them have arms and legs. Yeah.
And just following up on that, the androids that load the truck, either telling the truck or just the software in the cloud of this is what each individual box is in the truck, in what order and in what placement and everything else. And as soon as that truck backs up to its destination, the robots unloading it know everything.
Yep. It's all there.
And that is going to be worth a lot. And that is reoccurring subscription services. Because, maybe you do buy the bots, maybe you do buy the trucks, but you're going to subscribe to that orchestration layer, to that management layer.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that is going to be incredibly valuable to Tesla long term.
Yep.
So is that like a Tesla One software that's integrated in all the companies?
Yeah, that's what we were talking about at Tesla One.
Yeah.
And I don't know where Tesla One meets Grok, like all of that is, but they're working on it behind the scenes, first for their own use, and then they're going to sell it as a service. Why wouldn't you?
What's super interesting is that the whole operational side of Robotaxi is highly transmittable to these other problem sets, right? Because you've got this logistical movement of these objects around. And if you purpose them for delivery and not just moving humans, but purpose them for delivery, then you solve that problem. If you purpose that software for more logistical reasons inside semi, you solve that problem. If you combine the two, with a humanoid in the loop, you've solved that problem. So Tesla has that opportunity to build really quite an interesting ecosystem. Probably the missing part, in some ways, is maybe some of the larger last mile delivery, which is like what Rivian does with the delivery van for Amazon. It's like Tesla should want to be in that business too at some scaled down point. I think that maybe they would feel, we can rather ignore it because we could probably do this with Cybercab in the short term, at some scale, but who knows?
I think they'll get there. I think that there's money to be made and efficiency to add into the economy. Yeah,
what's interesting is when we developed the RPV, we called it RPV, Rivian Prime Van, but I don't know what they call it today. It's starting to get what's super. It's always interesting. These things. It's like when we started talking about it at Rivian, that started how the deal got. That was the formation of the deal with Amazon. Okay, was you're going to build us this special purpose delivery truck and you can continue with your consumer business without us being, directly involved. Go scale both businesses, do whatever you want. But, and then there was exclusivity on that Prime van eventually. Now you can go and buy that. If you're a plumber, you can go buy one, right? I mean, you can do what you want. But, what's really interesting was some of the early discussions we had is how would you take a fleet of these things, 200 of them. So the way Amazon works is they have a distribution where I'm talking to, you have a distribution warehouse in your super neighborhood, there's 50 vans there and they get loaded in the morning and they go out and they do their route and they usually do one route a day and that's it. Right. They might come back for a early morning and an afternoon route, and then the question is like, well, how do you charge these things at scale? You need some kind of infrastructure when you bring them back. You got to get them on charge and what's the priority and so forth. And the good news for that last mile stuff is those things aren't putting them on more than 100 miles a day. And the good news for EVs, unlike ICE, is ICE does terrible in city, right? We always have highway and city mileage, and the city is always terrible.
Yep.
Well, EVs do great under that like stop and go is not a problem for an EV. It's like, hey, that's the way I save battery, right?
Yep.
So the good news with that last mile stuff was those things don't go more than 100 miles a day. So that means that the charge time is pretty limited relative to what kind of infrastructure you might need to be. However, all that said, it is seeming to be just today, after being almost 2 years in the business of Rivian in that business. I don't know if it's been 2, but I think about 2 years pushing those things out, that they're starting to scale that business now with Amazon.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I've been wondering where that was. Cern, I don't know how long this is going to go, and I'm also worried at some point that my cable will cut out again. I did want to say one personal thing. Well, first off, thank you guys so much for having me. I've really enjoyed this conversation. Hopefully have me back at some point. But if you notice a fair amount of passion in my voice around AI and robotics and everything else, for me, it's not just hypothetical. It's not just money. Your more eagle-eyed viewers might have noticed I'm missing a few pieces and parts.
Yeah.
In the summer of 23, I made the poor decision to pick a fight with the flesh-eating bacteria, something I do not recommend anyone do. But these days, after an 8-month stint in the hospital and finally getting out in years of recovery, I've got chips in my hand. I got chips in my feet. There is AI for all these prosthetics that are helping them adjust and improve. It is still extraordinarily primitive compared to where we need to be.
Yeah.
In order for me to be productive at work and continue my job, I got to narrate things. I have to interact with the computer. AI is essential for me to live my life.
Interesting. Yeah.
And it can be so much better for me and people who face some of the issues I do and many others if we can steer where this industry is going in the right way so that it is beneficial for as many possible people and continues to evolve. And then most of my conversation's been very US-centric, and I know you have an international audience, and I'm sorry about that, but it should be beneficial to everyone, everywhere. Yeah. And I think we can get there. So, and by the way, if anyone from Neuralink is watching, I put in my application, when you get the robotic limbs, you can put whatever you want on my head if I can feel my hand again.
Wow.
That would be amazing.
Well, sorry that happened to you, but it's really, you're absolutely right. I mean, boy, what an opportunity to have. I mean, just even if all the agency pieces don't come back, guess what? If you had an Optimus in the house, how could it help you?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
100%.
Like imagine, I mean, we talk about the same thing with like EVs, can all of a sudden take an autonomous EV, like something that's empowered with FSD, all of a sudden can take someone who can no longer drive. You know, they're 80 years old. They can't drive anymore. They're 85 years old. And all of a sudden, boom, they can go and move around town again. Like, you know, completely, you know, just the robots moving them around, and there you go. And that's cool, right? I mean, that is really, really cool, because that's what causes people all that problem, is that they don't, you know, when they lose their agency, they lose a lot of their life spirit. So it's a cool tech for people.
It's amazing. And what Ken in there, I think, said was awesome. I'm not sure if we can top that. It's probably a good spot to close the show. And we've lost the connection with him anyway. So Ken, if you can hear us, we appreciate you coming on. We are excited to have you back. And to everyone else, we'll see you in 2 weeks.